nuestro invitado hoy tenemos bueno, hay que decir que la actividad de hoy pertenece al ciclo perenne, a las copiosas cantidades de conferencias que hemos tenido en la Cátedra Moses Mendelssohn de Estudios Judíos de la Universidad de Buenos Aires. Y hoy recibimos y vamos a disfrutar, para usar una noción espinociana, con alegría intelectual de el conocimiento, el saber y la puesta al día de las investigaciones del doctor Michael Engel. El doctor Michael Engel, cuya adscripción institucional entiendo que hoy es Heidelberg, ha estudiado denodadamente, hecho luz sobre la obra de un pensador, no un pensador desconocido, pero como pasó con otros pensadores, como Ibn Gabirol, con el Keter Malkut, era conocido. Bueno, el caso de Gabirol es más complejo porque fue tenido durante años como un pensador cristiano, e identificado con el autor, como autor de otra obra, pero en este caso Elías del Medigo era conocido sobre todo por una obra más vinculada a aspectos doctrinales, normativos, halágicos del judaísmo, y no tanto por las dos cuestiones que vamos a convenir en llamar así, por las dos cuestiones, que es un libro muy importante, y ahora voy a tratar de decir por qué es importante, pero lo va a decir sobre todo Miki. Es sobre todo importante porque constituye un documento apreciable en grado sumo respecto a la relevancia del averroísmo y ciertas variantes en el llamado averroísmo de Padua, o los tomistas de Padua. Decir también, y esto lo podemos discutir después, el destino del averroísmo en la filosofía, y quizás puede ser una pregunta posterior, si hay un hilo entre el signo distintivo naturalista que quizás caracterizó a la empresa especulativa judía a través de los siglos, es decir, esa inclinación más hacia un cierto camino de secularización. Un tema interesante es si Elías del Medigo representa una protosecularización dentro del judaísmo o no, como se habla del caraísmo en relación a Spinoza. ¿Qué relación hay, por ejemplo, con movimientos, personajes que van a venir después, como Samuel Uske, como Uriel da Costa, en fin? ¿Cuál es la huella del camino averroísta? Lo que voy a hacer inmediatamente, si les parece bien, es presentar... Rubén, ¿vos me pasaste el texto? Voy a presentar rápidamente una traducción que yo hice, que creo que la tienen todas, pero nada más, simplemente voy a leer, voy a presentar a Del Medigo, porque naturalmente muchos aquí lo desconocen, y yo lo desconocía hasta hacer un review, que así nos conocimos sobre este libro. Elías del Medigo nació en una familia de origen germánico que había vivido en Creta desde principios del siglo XIV. Existe cierta ambigüedad en torno a la fecha del nacimiento de Del Medigo, y aunque generalmente se da como 1460, o sea, es un pensador del 480, también se han sugerido fechas anteriores. De manera similar, no se sabe mucho sobre los años de formación de Del Medigo antes de su traslado a Italia. Durante la vida de Del Medigo, Creta era territorio veneciano, ¿no? Supongo la Serenísima República de Venecia. Un dominio que duró desde 1204 hasta 1669. En general parece que los judíos cretenses fueron tratados mejor bajo el dominio veneciano que en el resto de Europa. Aparte de las tensiones ocasionales que surgieron con sus vecinos griegos y los gobernantes venecianos. Repito, todo esto es de Michael. Algunas evidencias, incluido el propio testimonio de Del Medigo, sugieren que Del Medigo estaba componiendo obras sobre la ley judía durante su estancia en Candia, ¿no? En Creta, como él mismo indica. Además de su educación judía, también podemos suponer que Del Medigo adquirió sus primeros conocimientos de filosofía aristotélica mientras estaba en Creta. Un inventario de composiciones filosóficas en la biblioteca de un judío cretense del siglo XV apoya esta hipótesis. La lista incluye la Guía de los Perplejos, un supercomentario de Averroes, de Gersónides, a quien Del Medigo menciona en las dos investigaciones o en las dos cuestiones, y el Sefer Ha y Karim de Albo. Joseph Albo, ¿no?
Sí.
Además, la colección cretense de manuscritos hebreos de la Biblioteca Vaticana, la colección Fugger, incluye obras filosóficas de Abraham Bar Iyá, de Nehemia Kalomiti, a este no lo conozco, y Abraham Ibn Ezra, a este lo conozco. Este último mencionado en las dos investigaciones, así como traducciones hebreas de Aristóteles. En la batería crítica del libro de Michael figuran detalles de las traducciones que vamos a eludir aquí por razones narrativas. Estas fuentes, junto con la actividad filosófica registrada de Del Medigo a su supuesta llegada a Italia, acá estamos en la llegada a Italia, alrededor de 1480, sirven como evidencia de que Del Medigo se familiarizó con las obras clásicas de la filosofía judía mientras todavía estaba en Creta. Vamos a ver que después va a tener algunos problemas con la comunidad judía de Creta. La evidencia sobre los antecedentes de la familiaridad de Del Medigo con las fuentes escolásticas latinas es menos concluyente, pero podemos asumir con un alto grado de certeza que se encontró por primera vez con estos textos también mientras estaba en Creta, con base en la naturaleza multicultural de la isla y los diversos antecedentes de los eruditos que viajaban por ella. Además, el latín era el idioma administrativo en Creta, que dijimos que estaba bajo el gobierno de Venecia. Y hay evidencia de que los judíos de Creta dominaban el idioma. Dado que Del Medigo estaba componiendo traducciones y tratados en latín, poco después de su llegada a Italia, podemos atribuir su conocimiento de las obras escolásticas a sus años de formación en Creta. Claudia, vos tenés el texto, ¿te lo dieron en tu celular? Y los demás, bueno, pueden ahora hacer un pequeño...
Escanean el QR que está en la pared o acá y lo pueden descargar.
Y pueden seguirlo por... Sin embargo, lo más probable es que Del Medigo se familiarizara con al menos alguna de las obras de Averroes durante su estancia en Italia, a través de las primeras ediciones impresas que entraron en circulación en esa época. Como Creta estaba bajo dominio veneciano y Del Medigo era súbdito de la República Veneciana, partió hacia Venecia alrededor de 1480. Si querés continuar, no me quiero, podemos alternar, si querés continuar tú, por favor, Michael.
Yeah, I understood, but
Sí.
yeah, you don't want to read a bit more? That's it?
Sí.
That's introduction? Okay.
O si querés sigo, pero... Bueno, un poquito.
Maybe, yeah, a bit more, yes.
Sí. Bien.
Gracias.
Yo justamente...
No. Maybe until the end of the paragraph and then you can...
Somos dos gentlemen. Hay un exceso de... Ya intercambiamos culpas, ¿no? Un exchange de guilty. Una vez más, la evidencia de esto no es concluyente. Es posible que del Medigo haya llegado a las costas de Italia varios años antes, ya que cuando compuso las dos investigaciones a principios de la década de 1480, ya conocía bien las diversas tendencias filosóficas de Padua en ese momento. Para el plot nos falta lo principal, que es la pelea con los tomistas, que es lo que todos están esperando. En cuanto a los motivos que llevaron a la reubicación del Medigo, una conjetura es que se fue a Padua para estudiar medicina. Se encuentran varias referencias a la actividad del Medigo como médico o estudiante de medicina, incluido un testimonio en una carta a Marsilio Ficino, pero creo el que lo apadronaba era Pico. El propio del Medigo lo hacía discutir con Flavio Mitrídates, ¿no? Organizaban una soirée muy divertida.
Sí. Como
ahora. O sea, lo que hacían era, en la corte, ponían a Pico de la Mirándola. Organizaba un match entre Flavio Mitrídates, que para peor era un converso, era como Ferrer, o sea que tenía todo el background, o sea que la pelea era perfecta, contra este pobre judío que venía ahí como invitado, entrando por la puerta de servicio del palacio, y del Medigo defendía posiciones aristotélicas un poco más clásicas, y el otro estaba con la New Age de Ficino, de Pico, que aparte les encantaba la cábala. Hay un libro muy bueno de François Secret sobre esto. ¿Sigo?
Maybe.
Dale.
Okay. But so thank you very much, Pablo. Thank you very much for coming, all of you. I'm really, I'm very touched and happy. This is really quite unusual because maybe just 2 words about how everything happened. So when you write a book about medieval Jewish philosophy, you don't expect many people to read it. And then not only I realized that Pablo has read the book, but he made this beautiful radio show, right? The podcast, the radio show that he sent to me. We never spoke, we were never introduced, and he's from Buenos Aires, and we were just coming to Buenos Aires, so my wife being Argentinian.
Tomás
Abraham, the uncle of my wife. So there's a lot of...
Cuídate.
A lot of family connection and professional connection and everything sort of came together, and Pablo also translated, as you heard, the first chapter of the book. So sometimes just things happen cosmically, so to speak, and for me really this is such an event. So first of all, I'm very, very happy to be here and it's really a special event. I have to apologize that despite my Argentinian contacts, I can understand Spanish, but I cannot really speak it. So apologize in advance for speaking in Spanish. Yeah. So speaking in English, if something is unclear, please, you can ask in Spanish. I can respond perhaps mixed.
Él entiende porque Alejandra tiene que entender.
And so what I did was just to prepare really I think quite a brief introduction to the book. I mean, already Pablo did the introduction to the introduction. So I will just speak about the book, but maybe as a starting point to say something a bit bigger or broader about medieval Jewish philosophy. I thought maybe it's a bit more interesting because, as Pablo mentioned correctly, Elijah del Medigo is still a marginal figure. So if you never heard of him, it's okay. Even people within the field of Jewish studies, I mean, maybe they heard about him, but also for reasons that I will try to speculate about. So he's a marginal figure, but I will use him to say perhaps something broader. And that thing is about the nature of medieval Jewish philosophy. And in order to do that, Pablo, if you don't mind, we need to go a bit back in time. Elijah del Medigo was writing in the 15th century in Italy or in Venice. But the starting point of medieval Jewish philosophy is, of course, Maimonides. And already I learned that some of you here are writing your PhD on Maimonides, and maybe some of you have never heard about Maimonides, so I will try to say some things about Maimonides, not too general and not too particular. Maimonides is until today considered probably the greatest Jewish philosopher that was. Certainly the greatest medieval Jewish philosopher, but for many he's still the embodiment of Jewish philosophy. Maimonides lived in the 12th century in Cordoba, in the south of Spain, and he was first and foremost a major figure for Jewish law. He wrote this huge compendium of Jewish law, the Mishneh Torah, and up until today, if you are a practicing Jew, I'm not a practicing Jew because it's a Friday and look at us, so I'm obviously not a practicing Jew, but if you're a practicing Jew and you observe Jewish law, until today you will go and you will read what Maimonides had to say. He's still a relevant voice for Jewish law and for Jewish rabbis. However, he was also a philosopher. His major philosophical work is called Moreh Nevochim, which in Spanish could be translated how? I think you mentioned it before. Yeah, okay. So the Guide of the Perplexed. And in the Guide of the Perplexed, as the name of the book suggests, Maimonides is trying to help a certain perplexity or confusion. And the confusion is for those who are not sure whether they should go with Judaism or with philosophy, with Aristotle, to really simplify things. And the main motivation of Maimonides, and this is the first main point I want to make, and then we can move on, but the main motivation of Maimonides is not a purely philosophical one. In fact, it's not philosophical at all. Maimonides himself is saying that in this philosophical book. He says, if you want to learn philosophy, go and read Aristotle. I'm not going to teach you here philosophy. What I am going to teach you here is how philosophy and Judaism go hand in hand. The method of Maimonides in doing so is largely hermeneutical, that is, he's approaching the biblical text and he's offering a commentary. He's approaching different biblical texts, books of the Bible, Genesis, the books of the prophets. In Genesis, he's referring to different narratives, the story of the creation, Adam and Eve, Garden of Eden. In the first part of the guide, he has like a philosophical dictionary of biblical terms. In other words, he's reading the Bible. Another famous book written more or less in that time, also reading the Bible and offering a completely different interpretation, is the Zohar, by the way. But we put this aside. Maimonides is reading the Bible, and his motivation is religious, and more specifically, is Jewish, is devotion, is confession. Okay. So this is the first, I don't know if irony, but the somewhat strange thing about, there are many strange things about the history of Jewish philosophy or medieval Jewish philosophy, but perhaps the strangest thing about it is that the biggest, the most significant book of medieval Jewish philosophy is not a philosophy book. Mm-hmm. And that's quite different from someone like Aquinas, so if you think about the Catholic tradition, that's already, sets Jewish philosophy apart. This ambition, I don't know, Pablo, but maybe you're already disagreeing, but we can speak about it. But I think what I've said until now is quite mainstream. It's just, that's the material. What I'm going to say now is perhaps a bit more controversial, but I think it's still quite based. That this methodology and this motivation of Maimonides colored the rest of the history of Jewish philosophy for many generations and for many authors. by that I mean that even into the Haskalah, Mendelssohn, you know much more than me, but I think someone like Mendelssohn is also trying to show that you can be a Jew and a philosopher and somehow harmonize the particular aspect of your Jewishness and the more universal aspect of your philosophical thinking.
Atenas y Jerusalén.
In Jerusalem, in Jerusalem. Okay. Del Medigo, who lived in the 15th century, also wrote a book like that, in this genre of philosophical writing, called Bechinat Hadat. Bechinat Hadat, in Hebrew, the examination of religion. And you mentioned this book before. And in this book, Del Medigo is trying to do exactly what Maimonides was trying to do. He's trying to show basically that Judaism is rational, that there is no discrepancy between Judaism and philosophy, that exactly what I was going to say, that Christianity is anti-rational, is superstitious, so a real sort of apologetic, polemic book from the day of Maimonides. If that would be the story, my lecture would be quite boring, and I would probably won't choose Del Medigo as my protagonist. However, and here things get a twist. Bechinat Hadat is one book that was translated. 99% of the scholarship on Maimonides, 99% is dedicated to this one book. Maimonides wrote another stack of, we cannot say books because they were never edited because no one cared about them, of manuscripts, holding Maimonides. Del Medigo, sorry, Del Medigo. Del Medigo wrote a host of philosophical works that no one cared about and no one cared to edit, because there he's doing philosophy. He's doing Aristotelian philosophy. And one of these works is the work that I wrote my book on and that I am now editing. And I want to speak about this corpus. Okay? Are you with me until now? Is that okay? So the question, of course, comes to if Del Medigo went the way of Maimonides and thought that the task is to show that philosophy and Judaism go hand in hand, why did he bother to write secular philosophical works or purely philosophical Aristotelian works? In order to understand that, another name, and that's the last name I promise that I'm going to bring, but it's an important one, and that's the name of Averroes. And just before coming here, I actually thought about that there is something special speaking about Averroes in Buenos Aires, right? Because of course.
El largo comentario.
Why is it special to speak about Averroes in Buenos Aires? Because of Borges. Thank you very much. I just thought about it now when we were in the taxi. So that could be also a Borgian story. So sitting here now speaking about Borges, writing Averroes.
Yes.
If you don't really forget it. So Averroes is an important figure to understand Del Medigo and to understand this type of doing philosophy that I would like to speak about. Averroes lived at the same time like Maimonides, also in Cordoba. And there's a lot of speculations whether they knew each other, yes or not, if Maimonides recommended that we should read it. It's a huge dispute. And Maimonides scholars are really eating each other if he did know of Averroes or not. And it's actually a very contemporary, right now, scholar. As we speak, scholars are eating each other about this question, and I try to keep up. But we know that they lived and wrote at the same time and in the same place. Averroes was Muslim, he was not Jewish, but he was also interested in philosophy, Aristotelian philosophy. And the main methodological difference between Maimonides and Averroes could be described as follows. Again, I'm doing a simplification. The goal of Maimonides was to extend the starting point of Ibn Rushd. What do I mean by that? Maimonides Averroes. Maimonides spent his life or his career trying to convince us that philosophy and Judaism or philosophy and religion can go together. And Ibn Rushd started by saying, okay, I get it, I agree, so let's do philosophy. So why to try harmonize something that we agree we can harmonize? And in the decisive treatise, Ibn Rushd is writing in a very explicit way, it's not only that we can engage in philosophy, as good Muslims, we must engage in philosophy. The religious law commands those who are able to do philosophical speculation, they have to do that. Yeah, they get the kick and they go and they do philosophy. And they don't look back and say, but religion, we're still good. No, you go and you do philosophy. And Averroes didn't just say that or preach that. He wrote a long series of commentaries on Aristotle. He wrote a part of the Politics. He wrote one commentary for each book that Aristotle wrote. For some, he wrote 2 commentaries. And for 3 books, the Posterior Analytics, the De Anima, the Physics, the Metaphysics, and the Decalogue, he wrote 3 commentaries for each of these works. So we're speaking about a huge mass of commentaries.
De Anima.
De Anima. De Anima, he also wrote 3 commentaries, and I will get to that right now. So we're speaking about a huge corpus of commentaries on Aristotle, which are essentially philosophical. Averroes is referring to other authors in these commentaries, but to other philosophers, to Greek, to Christians, to Muslims. He doesn't care about the religious demo. All he cares about are the philosophical ideas. This corpus of commentaries, of secularized, naturalized commentaries on Aristotle, had very little impact in the Muslim world, which is a very interesting fact, but they had a huge impact both on the Jewish and on the Christian worlds as they were translated into Hebrew and Latin. And this is the space where we find Del Medigo. Del Medigo is in Padua in the 15th century. In Padua, the ideas of Averroes were sought after like water. This is a bit speculative. It's not my idea. But I think there's good reasons to assume that Italy in general and Italian universities were not so religious. So, as opposed to Paris or to Oxford, faculties of theology in Italy, some of them opened very late, some of them never opened. And in Italy there was much more emphasis on medicine and on law.
El médico era médico.
Del Medigo was probably studying medicine or wanted to study medicine. And this secularized ambience, of course no one was secular. Yeah, we're speaking about the 50s, no one was secular, but this secularized ambience of studies made Averroes very popular. Yeah. And Del Medigo was living there. And Del Medigo had a very particular position because he was Jewish. He could read the works of Averroes, the commentaries in Hebrew, but he could also read and write in Latin. So in one of his works, he's saying, I'm in a position that none of you are. Not the Jews, not because I write this course. I can translate from Hebrew to Latin. I can translate from Latin to Hebrew. He wrote independent works on Averroistic philosophy. And he was a teacher to the thought of Averroes. That was his function in a very Averroistic city. The irony, again, I'm sorry, I don't want to introduce too many complexities, but because he was Jewish, he couldn't work officially at the university, so he had to be hired by all these individual patrons. Okay, I stop here with all the input, and from now we can really speak about Del Medigo, but also just to recap for us, for myself, the point is that Del Medigo felt free to do philosophy without feeling apologetic, without doing apologetics, and without explaining all the time why is it okay, is it just to do philosophy. He wrote treatises on physics, on metaphysics, on psychology, and in the rest of the time, so for the next 10 minutes, I promise not more, I want to focus on his work on psychology, which is also my book. I'm sorry that I don't have a copy here that I can, imagine a virtual copy. So, the book was published 2017, so already quite a while ago, but it's still relevant because I'm still editing this text, and it's till the day I die, I'm going to work on the So, one of his works, as I mentioned, as Pablo mentioned, is the 2 investigations. As I said, it was never published. It's going to be published now. with Brill for the first time after 500 years, hopefully. And this is a very interesting treatise, tractate. And we can, I don't know if we will have time to, I think we will, so I'm not going to enter all of its themes and all of the, I understood that some others read it, so if you will have, I will be very happy, but I just want to speak really about the one major theme. The one major theme of the treatise is the human soul. And connected to it is the question of what happens to our soul after we die. This question, of course, received an answer in the Jewish tradition by Jewish philosophers and Jewish theology. The typical theological Jewish position is that when we are born, God somehow infuses, that's also a very Catholic view, God somehow infuses an immaterial soul within us. Before he does it, he creates the soul out of what? Ex nihilo, out of nothing. So God creates a soul ex nihilo, infuses us in a particular human being. When we die, this soul remains floating somewhere, somehow, and then at some point there is the resurrection, our body comes, we get united, and that's it. And we live forever, happily if we were good, not so happily if we were bad. You find it in Saadia Gaon, a Jewish philosopher of the 10th century. Elijah del Medigo looks at this worldview, or this picture, and says, explicitly, he said, this is nonsense, 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 nonsense. This is nonsense. If you want to believe, fine. But don't doctrinize it. And Elijah del Medigo, the Jewish philosopher, and he was Jewish, and he was a practicing Jewish. The Jewish philosophers come to this worldview, and like you do to a balloon. One by one, all of the tenets that you find in these doctrines is blowing. That God creates the souls ex nihilo out of nothing. Del Medigo says, there is no such a thing as creation ex nihilo. But God can, no, also not for God. It's contradiction in terms. For an Aristotelian, every creation is a form of change. When we say that something is created, it means that something stopped being X and became Y. But when Y is created, there is always the X behind it that was somehow changed and became Y. There is no such thing as creation ex nihilo. There are no free gifts. One. Second, God puts the soul in each of us individually. I am very sorry to tell you, says the Medigo in the two investigations, you the reader, but God doesn't know you. And he doesn't know me. One second. And he doesn't, just to finish the sentence, he doesn't know particulars. What is the only thing that God, you're an Averroist, you're doing like that all the time. What is the only thing that God knows? God only knows himself. And then there is a whole theory behind how from God knowing himself still there is some connection between God and the world, doesn't matter. But God doesn't know individuals. So the second point, that was demolished. Sorry about that.
No, si les parece, bueno, ahora ya entramos en, digamos, el trabajo más especulativo, ¿no? Ahí entramos en un territorio y bueno, a ver si ahí entiendo y que entiendo yo, a ver si estoy correcto o no, que la forma sustancial, ¿no? Que el núcleo, el core de la discusión es la creación, si el alma, si la forma sustancial es subsistente, es una entidad subsistente y creada en ex nihilo para cada sujeto.
Yes, ¿no? and exactly. Thank you for the translation. And I will just come to so.
Sí, porque la parte especulativa es más compleja para.
And with that, I will finish this part, and I hope everyone can follow. And then, if you want to translate also the last, actually, that's very helpful. So thank you. So the last thing that Del Medigo is saying, and that's again a classic Aristotelian position, is that against the idea that there is a resurrection, against the idea that the soul stays in its entirety somewhere floating until the body resurrects, Del Medigo is saying, like many others before him and after him, that the only aspect of our soul that remains is our intellect. The only thing that survives is our intellect. Why is that? And that's the last really philosophical part of my talk. It is because all our other faculties are engaged with concrete aspects or with concrete objects. This glass, this chair, this. So whatever something is concrete in the here and now, the corresponding faculty is also concrete and is also in the here and the now. The intellect is engaged with, or the intellect is the only aspect in us that is engaged with eternal objects. What are these eternal objects? It's not so mystical, real like in Kabbalah. It's simply ideas, concepts. This concept can be 2 plus 3 equals 5. This thing, this object, this thought is eternal. Or also for Del Medigo, another example is not this dog or that dog, but dogness, the dog, the idea of a dog. Ideas are eternal, and therefore the aspect in me that touches eternal ideas has to be eternal as well. And I always, when I teach Del Medigo or also Maimonides, and this can sound a bit crazy, I always try to tell students that if you think about it, there is something quite common sense in this approach, in the sense that there is really something different between touching this and thinking about a mathematical law. Something happened, something different happens in you as a subject, in these two different types of perceptions. Yeah? Because when you touch something, you feel you are engaged in corporality, you feel your own corporality being engaged, whereas where you're thinking about something which is timeless, there is something in you which is somehow attuned to this timelessness. I think Husserl spoke about this as well, but I know it. Okay, so, and this aspect of you, Del Medigo, and the entire Averroistic tradition is saying, okay, this thing is the only thing that we can speak about which is eternal. And this thing has, of course, nothing to do with Jewish law, with commandments, with mystical. No, all you need to do to gain immortality is to be engaged in intellectual activity.
Tercer género de conocimiento de Spinoza.
And of course, Spinoza, you can speak for hours about, because Spinoza is also to an extent belonging to this, although to a different place. Okay, so to conclude, the soul, there is no resurrection, and there is no creation ex nihilo. God doesn't know us as individuals. There is no resurrection, and the only thing that survives the death of our body is our intellect, something which is essentially non-religious. And to make things even more radical, and I will just say it, and if you want we can speak, I will not explain this point. Del Medigo also says that this intellect that survives is actually shared by all of us. There is only one intellect. Only one intellect, because
compartido.
If shared by, compartido by, because if the intellect would be mine and yours, it will be individuated, and everything that is individual is also corporal.
Participation.
So it's a sort of participation. So this is the worldview about the soul and the survival of the soul. There is one intellect, and this intellect is actually already eternal, and we just jump on it like you jump on a bus every time you want to perform the thinking. And that's, something like that. And to conclude, Del Medigo himself, of course, realizes how radical this theory is. So at the end of the two investigation, he says, you, the reader, don't think that I really think that. Yeah, that's just philosophy. As a Jewish practitioner, I have my own views. So that's the irony, and this is, I'm almost finished, but just to think about this journey, maybe I go back to Maimonides. Maimonides is legitimizing philosophy. Averroes says, great, so let's do philosophy. Del Medigo is going with doing philosophy, and then they get very far. And then they look back and say, no, sorry, this is really crazy. So let's just do the Spaltung, you say in German, obviously, the division, the split between. Okay. I hope this is clear, and I want to really finish now, my last sort of question, and then it will lead to a discussion. Wait, 1 second. It's the promo to the club. I want to ask, is is Elijah del Medigo a Jewish philosopher? Is he a Jewish philosopher? Now, I'm really, for the last 15 years, I'm asking myself the same question, and I want to propose that he is, even in his philosophical, secular, non-Jewish work, for two reasons, or two things to think about. One reason is because these themes are still religious, yeah? God, the resurrection of the soul, the nature of the human soul, etc., etc.
Her mother.
Yes, these are philosophical engagements with theological themes. But there is another reason, which I think is more important. And this is more in sociological, anthropological perspective. Elijah del Medigo was a Jewish philosopher because for many Jews, the philosophy of Averroes was a valid engagement. How do we know that? At the moment in Hamburg, there is a project that I'm very close to. I'm not part of this project, but I'm very close to. We're doing things together. And this project is of collecting and assessing and looking at Hebrew medieval manuscripts. What Jews actually did in the Middle Ages. And you find tens and tens and tens and tens of manuscripts by Jews engaging with these Averroes secularized engagements. And these were Jews who were part of the community, who never turned their back to the faith, but still felt that this could be part of their intellectual engagement. So I think that we should perhaps broaden the definition to include more and more philosophical texts that don't necessarily treat directly the biblical text as interpretation. These are just thoughts. That was my presentation of the book, and thank you very much again, Pablo, and thank you for coming.
Michael.
Thank you.
Fantástico. Si hay alguien preguntas.
Yo tengo alguna duda.
Muchas, sí.
Curiosa y ignorante. Yo estudio Pomponazzi.
Wow.
Sí, trabajo Pomponazzi.
I wrote an article about him now. We have to speak after.
Sure.
Really? Wow,
Yeah.
crazy. Small world.
¿Tuvo alguna consecuencia por haber escrito eso? No. Consecuencia. Pomponazzi sufrió the aftermath after writing this treatise and this interpretation of the anima.
Política.
Did he have any political or religious?
You mean Del Medigo?
Yeah.
If he wrote something about politics.
No.
Sorry.
If he had any political or consequences.
Problems.
Yeah.
That's a very good question. And he didn't have because he was a really liminal figure. Okay. So in the Jewish community, in the Jewish community, he was part of the community, although he was very on the fringes. And that's a very good story about Del Medigo is that, so he really believed in rational Judaism, and he lived in Padua, and I think Thomas, I told you this story, or I started to tell you, most of the Jews that came into Padua at the time came from Ashkenazi Jew, from Germany. And these were very traditionalist type of Jews, very Kabbalah oriented. And Del Medigo doesn't write much about his life but there is one point that he writes quite at length. And he writes, I feel very bad. I feel very bad here. I feel that I don't belong here among the Jews here. Why? Because he describes, and maybe some of you know this practice, at Rosh Hashanah, at the Jewish New Year, the Jews go and they throw their sins to the river. I don't know if any of you know this.
Sí,
it's called Tashlich.
Tú lo dices en el libro, lo cuentas en el libro, sí.
And he says, okay, I watch this.
Él critica un rito de Rosh Hashanah, que consiste en tirar los pecados, que es como una pacará, como es cuando como un exorcismo, como la capará, o sea, tiran toda la maldad, los pecados, es como una especie de chivo expiatorio y lo tiran al río. Y él criticó como absurdo.
So he says it in a very subtle way. He just says they're throwing the sins to the river, okay, but then they don't eat the fish for a while. Why? Because the fish have eaten their sins. So he's just in a very dry, almost like an English type of.
He's just describing.
And he's just describing. He says, and with these people, I'm expected to have. So he was very anti-superstition. Just to go back to your question, he was very at the margin, at the fringes of this community. Apparently, he had some direct conflicts, but he was still a part of the Jewish community. He had no official role within Christian establishment. You know, Pomponazzi got into serious trouble because he was Christian and was in the university. But Del Medigo was not at the university. And I think this liminal thing, neither here nor there, which made him very frustrated, probably also saved him for some problems. Thank you.
Todo cayer.
Mucho.
El kashrut del viernes a la noche. Sí. ¿Alguna otra pregunta? Ezequiel. No me odies.
Algo por ahí obvio, pero una tontería. Este libro que estás editando, las dos investigaciones,
Sí.
¿En qué está escrito?
In which language? Another good question. It was written in Hebrew. Sorry, we have the Hebrew surviving, and Del Medigo says I wrote it first in Latin, and then I translated it into Hebrew. It's probably true. Why? Because there are other works of Del Medigo that survived in Latin, and Giovanni Licata from Rome and myself are now editing another bilingual. So we know that he wrote in Latin. The interesting question, I still don't have an answer after 15 years. Why did he translate it into Hebrew?
¿Para quién?
Para quién? For whom? Because he says that these Jews here have nothing. So it's a very interesting question, and I still don't have an answer. I'm not sure why he did that.
And is it suspicious why the Latin one didn't survive?
Say it again, sorry?
Any idea why the Latin didn't survive?
Didn't survive. No.
Hypothesis.
How do you know why things don't survive, right? No, it could be a chance. It could be that he decided to. We have in the library of Pico de la Mirandola, we have references to these books, but I don't remember if in Latin or in Hebrew. It's unclear.
Cuando tú hablas cuando el Medigo habla de los tomistas, que los traduce como teólogos,
Yeah.
sería la noción de Medivrei Hadatot.
Medabrei Hadatot, yeah.
Es esa, ¿no?
Medabrei Hadatot, yeah. This is
Son
the
los teólogos.
theologians, yeah.
Son tomistas.
Los fuentes, yeah.
El sinónimo de tomista.
The Medigo is writing also, so when I said before this idea that the soul is infused, etc. Actually, so this you find in Jewish philosophy, but the target of the Medigo is Thomas Aquinas, or the Thomists in Padua. I'm 99% sure. That was my first article after I did my PhD. And it was a discovery that I was very proud of. Yeah, because that's very interesting. Because he doesn't refer to them in name, because maybe then he would get into trouble. Yeah, because Aquinas was.
Hillel ben Shmuel de Verona. Él fue un defensor de Tomás, de Tomás de Aquino. Y del Medigo discutió, ¿no? Con Hillel ben Shmuel de Verona, que creo que eran de Nápoles, venían de Nápoles.
Yeah, the south. Funny that you mentioned that, because I also wrote an article about it. I wrote an article, it's still a draft, where I'm comparing, because both Hillel and Del Medigo are citing from Aquinas, but in a completely different way. So, I mean, I don't want to get to the details that may be boring, but they're doing it in a very different way. Hillel is employing, for example, he's transliterating the Latin. He's writing Latin in Hebrew words, and Del Medigo is translating all the time. Doesn't matter. The point is that we have an example that Thomas Aquinas, or Catholic philosophy in general, was very influential on Italian Jews from the 13th century up until the Renaissance. And they had different strategies to deal with that, because it was, of course, very sensitive.
Fernando, nuestro hebraísta más distinguido.
First, cuando nombraste
Más alto.
esta suerte de no quiero llamarlo dogmas,
Sí.
pero de la resurrección,
Sí.
de la infusión,
Sí.
¿no? De alguna forma él indirectamente, además de contra los tomistas, estaría peleándose con la tradición talmúdica,
Claro.
que eso es rastreable en el Talmud, esas ideas. You can find those ideas
in the Talmud.
In the Talmud, right?
He says, I'm cutting you because that's the point. He says the Medigo. You can believe it.
Es buenísima la
No,
pregunta.
he says, you can believe it as a Jew, you can believe it. But these are not doctrines, this is not philosophy, this is not something that you can...
Epicúides.
It's not something that you can
Resurrection.
demonstrate or even try to demonstrate, or other types of less demonstrable proofs. It's not in that realm, it's in the realm of belief. And yeah, you should pronounce them, or maybe you should believe them somehow. And this is really the double truth theory.
Right.
My theory, because people say that this double truth theory, they don't know if it exists or not. For me, the Medigo is a living case of this, really, more than any Christian. For me, more than any Christian in his little bit.
He thinks that he can achieve a certain level of certainty in rational thought or possibility.
No. I mean, he's referring to various logical works, and he's making the distinction between demonstrable proofs and less demonstrable and rhetorical or dialectical.
Yeah.
So he says, this we can definitely prove, this we are not so sure, this is probable. But in the philosophical field, you can play this game. In the theological thing, you can believe whatever you want, basically. So it's not
thing is in this case it's much more related to the Talmudic position, because
which position? Sorry.
The Talmudic position, the rabbinic position, because somehow reading the Bible, because I'm thinking that when this last line these last sentences you mentioned of this book, when he mentioned, well, this is philosophy, but do not believe I believe in that. Somehow reading the Bible, as for example Riel Acosta did much some years later, some centuries much later, somehow you, according to them, you can reach the same consequences or conclusions, that the soul is not immortal, that it's no resurrection, that it's just the Talmudic dreams or craziness.
But then I don't think that's I see but Del Medigo hates. Sorry, that's a very good. The question helps me to say something that I think that I didn't say. What Del Medigo hates, he doesn't hate the Torah, and he doesn't opposes the Torah, and he doesn't opposes the Talmud. He opposes theology. Theology is the attempt to pretend that you can prove these things philosophically, moreover, on Aristotelian grounds.
Right.
And that's why he doesn't like the Thomists. That's why the Thomists were our biggest. You see? You understand?
Yeah, I understand.
So I don't think it's a polemic against the Talmud, because the Talmud and the whole Jewish thing is...
One thing about those last lines, maybe to go farther.
But thank you for
very interesting.
Muchas gracias. Me encantó la presentación tuya.
Gracias.
Y la presentación de Pablo. En este punto quisiera contribuir con la siguiente contribución, valga la redundancia. Cuando hay esa choque o mixture de aguas, de interpretación de las cosas, uno podría proponer ordenar el espacio en tres niveles. Uno, el divino; otro, el sagrado; y otro, lo religioso. En lo divino están cosas que la humanidad no puede alcanzar, digamos, creación de la vida. En lo sagrado es el espacio donde se hablan cosas que en el espacio profano lo logran al sagrado. Y en el religioso están los ritos que una comunidad comparte. Entonces, de ese modo, el guía de Medigo puede analizar cosas de lo divino, la inmortalidad del alma, digamos. En lo sagrado, él puede tener disonancia con los cabalistas o alguna discontinuidad con los talmudistas. Pero en la religión él está ahí con ciertas inconsistencias o que no comparte. Pero en esos tres planos uno puede ubicar el pensamiento y las incoherencias, por lo cual Emilia sigue siendo un filósofo judío. ¿Me estás entendiendo?
I understood, but I don't understand the...
¿Qué level?
No, I understood the three levels, yeah.
Sacred,
Yeah.
religion.
Divine, sacred,
Sí.
and religion. Yeah.
Y del Medigo, no religion. Only.
Yes, I think, yeah. I think more or less I agree. That's the separation.
Esto puede chocar un poco el sagrado que dice, bueno, están los de soja que yo no veo, y está esta otra aparición, la filosofía. Aquí tenemos un poco de lío. Ambos nos referimos a la divinidad, al alma, a la eternidad, y incluso comparten las cosas. Pero él es una parte de la heterogénea unidad que existe siempre. O sea, pensar si es que el filósofo judío no, es un poco severo cuando uno ve que puede haber disonancias en los tres planos.
I think I understand and I think I agree.
Ahora, la unidad del intelecto material, ahí hay también una cosa que está relacionada con lo que dijo acá usted y Fernando, y hackea o taclea el alma como sujeto de imputación y por lo tanto toca el tema de esa unidad del intelecto que está desprovisto, que carece de dimensiones normativas, lleva al alma, al nefesh, al ruach, a no tener que rendir cuentas. Es decir, hay una idea de exoneración, hay una idea de que eso supongo que la institución religiosa puede socavar, undermine, en el sentido en que en sus últimas consecuencias el averroísmo, y ahora voy a contar una anécdota, el averroísmo podría suponer una desresponsabilización de la acción humana, de las mitzvot, o de una conducta moral. ¿No? Ahí hay un tema de que creo que se articula con lo que dijo Fernando, o sea, el averroísmo, no sé, Sigar de Brabante, lo que uno quiera, y yo creo que eso, más que un problema especulativo e idético, quizás lo que está en juego es la articulación con la práctica ética, que es como una suerte de convenio comunitario, y que, como bien dijo Fernando, la van a sufrir todos los disidentes judíos a través de la historia, y que tiene que ver con que la idea de una entidad subsistente, de la forma sustancial como una entidad subsistente creada ex nihilo, es pasible de ser juzgada después de la muerte y por lo tanto de castigos y premios. Juzgada, claro, que en último término, si aceptamos la premisa, el presupuesto averrosiano, queda diluida en la nube, ¿no? Hay un problema también político, me parece, y moral con el averroísmo, en ese punto que es soteriológico, que tiene que ver con la salvación. ¿Cómo se plantearía el problema soteriológico de la salvación del alma personal, que finalmente es el gran tema del catolicismo, la salvación? Y es, digamos, la piedra, ¿no? Mejor tomemos un vino.
I affirm and confirm.
No podemos estar...
I could follow and I think...
Me acuerdo de una frase, perdón. Ya estamos. Me acuerdo de una frase de Leo Strauss que decía así: los judíos son el pueblo elegido, fuimos señalados como el pueblo elegido para mostrar que no hay redención.
I think it's still an open question. What do you do? Let's put it there is there is a tension in religious philosophy. In the Catholic world, in the Muslim world, in the Jewish world, there is a tension. There is the Aristotelian secularized aspects, and then there is the religious tradition. And at some point, and it's almost unfair because it's like Jewish scholarship give place as long as you keep this tension. If this tension breaks down to the form of religiosity or Kabbalah, people study that. But what happens when this tension breaks and the Jew decides to do philosophy? Who will study? And this is from an academic perspective. When you speak about faculties nowadays, Del Medigo will be very, for someone like you working on Pomponazzi, I'm sure it's very relevant for you, and I'm sure maybe you heard about Del Medigo, but you didn't read it because it wasn't translated to Spanish, to English, right? So, and that's the tragedy, right? Because who will study this material? Where do we? So, and for me that's a real question, and I'm trying to answer it not only sitting here and speaking about it, but also by editing it and putting it into light and insisting to teach it in Jewish context, not only because he was coming from the Maimonidean tradition and he just broke out, but still giving the respect it deserves, something like that. Although I'm still cooking with these questions.
Yo soy Alberto.
Alberto.
Sí. Estaba pensando con la pregunta tuya, las consecuencias políticas del trabajo del Medigo. Estaba pensando en lo que tú dijiste, Pablo, acerca de Spinoza.
Yeah, of course.
La raíz de las preguntas del Medigo en cuanto al alma me hace acordar a los filósofos favoritos de Spinoza también, Epicuro, Demócrito y Lucrecio, en donde Epicuro ya sostenía que hasta el alma no podía crearse ex nihilo, y la conservación también, que algo que se destruye no regresa a la nada, está ahí. Ahora, Spinoza después mejora eso, digamos, que somos expresión de los atributos de Dios en cuanto a extensión y pensamiento. Tú no podrías pensar que Del Medigo esté en la tradición de Spinoza.
Yeah, definitely. And people say that Spinoza read Del Medigo, but more the...
Salomón no.
Sorry?
Salomón no. Joseph Salomón
Says
del
that
Medigo
no.
o del Medigo.
That Spinoza read Del Medigo, but we're not... No, Elijah Del Medigo, but we're not sure. But it doesn't matter if you read him or not, it's definitely, there is a line leading. Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Gabriel, ¿no?
I have two questions. The first one is, which are the intellectual networks of Del Medigo? Because you talk about the 15th century, so I wonder what about the Italian Renaissance?
He hated it. Wonderful question. Yeah.
And the second one, is there any link or relationship with the Spanish Thomists, the new Christians like Alonso de Cartagena, his father, Pablo de Santa Marina, who was Shlomo Alevi before, so all these Jewish that became new Christians and they are reading the same sources you mentioned.
So, just to the second point, thank you so much for, it's a fascinating aspect that I never thought, and for sure you know much more than me, so I would be curious to, but we are speaking about Spain, right?
Yes.
Not about Italy. Yeah. Geographically, I mean, these are different, and my suspicion is that no, but definitely it's something to think about. So, and to go back to your first, maybe trying to answer both questions together. Del Medigo, and again, it's all the time going back to this Pomponazzi. Although he was Jewish, in his work he's reflecting the intellectual landscape of Italy of the time. That's why I would be a bit skeptical about Salamanca or Spain. And his intellectual landscape is the Averroists versus the Thomists, A. B, debates within the Averroist camp. So, for example, John of Jandan, perhaps he was a famous Christian Averroist, and in Padua, the Latin circles really criticized. And the Medigo is writing a lot against this John of Jandan. He's calling him Yohanan Miandan, and he's writing a lot in Hebrew, which is really weird, but he's doing that. So he's reflecting a landscape which is really Averroist against Thomists, and to that you need to add the Italian Renaissance. I guess when you speak about Renaissance, you speak about Christian Kabbalah, about Ficino, about Florence, about these circles. The Medigo went to Florence and went back immediately to Padua. He didn't feel good there. And we have, as you mentioned, Pablo, we have, obviously, someone documented a meeting between him and Ficino and Mithridates and all of these eclectical authors, very much influenced by New Age. Plato. I don't want to be, I also say sometimes, but I try not to be disrespectful. Maybe New Age is not a disrespectful thing, but I mean, they were doing things very much influenced by this Neoplatonic, syncretic, let's say. And he felt much more at home within the more scientific atmosphere of Padua and its faculty of medicine and Averroist mind. So I don't know if that somehow. And all of this, as I said, is a reflection of the non-Jewish scene. Very little references to Jewish authors in his philosophical works, almost nothing.
¿Una pregunta más?
Sí, por todos.
En este corpus de textos filosóficos,
sí,
¿se presenta una especie de saber monolítico o se muestra que hay una diversidad histórica de opiniones, más, en un sentido más dialéctico? Y si se presenta un saber monolítico, ¿qué es? ¿Se lo atribuye a Averroes? ¿O en realidad es que Averroes simplemente leyó bien a Aristóteles?
Harold Bloom, todos leen mal.
I'm not sure I understood the end of the question. You're asking if it was like a monolithic, homogeneous corpus. Sí. It was. He was trying to explain Averroes the best way possible. He has also a treatise, De Efficientia Mundi, sorry about the questions having to do with creation. And in all of his works on metaphysical and physical, he does this thing of bringing materials that were. His originality is in bringing Jewish Averroism or Hebrew Averroism in order to discuss themes that were discussed within Latin Averroism. So making this Averroist Hebrew-Latin synthesis. That was his big aim.
In Popkin's time,
Maybe.
Languedoc, Perpignan, el Midi, todo lo que te gusta. El Midi,
Sí.
Toulouse, Bordeaux. ¿Hay una influencia entre la tradición escéptica como un camino de la modernidad y el averroísmo? ¿Hay una línea? Of course.
Jewish Averroism was born in Provence.
Alfond.
So Averroes was working in Cordova in the 12th century. He was translated mainly in Provence. So you need to think about going a bit north to the south of Spain. He was translated there. And then it exploded everywhere in the Jewish world.
Es muy importante la ruta esa al sur de Francia. El sur de Francia es muy importante.
Yeah, it is. And my new project, I'm doing a PR to myself. Thank you. So there's a new project. I'm also looking for people to work in the project. It's about the transfer of these Averroistic treatises from Provence when they were translated and how they exploded in Italy. That's a route that no one has ever researched.
Suarez.
Not so related, but he was
Montel.
Completely not related. But the spirit is there. The spirit.
Hay algo ahí, hay algo. Sí. ¿Alguna pregunta?
Yo, Pablo, tomando, ¿puedo en español, castellano?
Sí.
No.
Le dan órdenes en español.
Sí. ¿Por quién? No, estaba pensando, cuando venía para acá, yo no conocía a nuestro personaje, sí. Y no sé, si Wikipedia no miente, muere en 1493. O sea que Elisha, vamos a llamar.
Sí.
no vive, digamos, en la Europa mediterránea del gran éxodo sefardita, ¿verdad? Entonces, ¿no es cierto?
Sí.
1492, 1493 muere, no, digamos, no conoce ese gran éxodo, por lo tanto pensaba, digamos, como cuando los pones, digamos, como en esa línea, digamos, intelectual, a Maimónides y a Elisha, no me sale del Medigo. Claro, Maimónides, digamos, está como muy imbuido, digamos, de la España mora, convive, mientras que del otro lado del Mediterráneo pareciera como que él, que proviene de una familia germánica, no tiene esa influencia mora, esa influencia islámica.
I think again, if I understood your question, we don't need to identify the expulsion from Spain with the spreading of Spanish ideas elsewhere. These things happened much before that. Maybe I misunderstood your question.
No, that's fine. No, what I'm trying to think is that they live in different geographies, relating with different kind of societies.
Yes, that's true, yes.
And Averroes, I understand that it was much more intertwined in the life of Maimonides than in Crete when he grew up.
But in Crete, thank you very much. Now I understand. But Crete, he learned in Crete and he grew up, but he moved probably at a very young age. And Crete was Venetian. Crete was Venice at the time.
La
So
Serenísima.
the language.
But there was no Moros, no Islamic culture there.
There was no Islamic culture, but Averroes wasn't Islamic already. He was Judified. He was Hebraized. He was translated into Hebrew, and that's a very important. Thank you. That's a very important. I mean, Averroes was Christian, was Muslim, but once he's translated into Hebrew, people just used him without any. He lost his. And that's another aspect of Jewish philosophy that maybe is not emphasized enough. This really intercultural, but it's more than intercultural because, as I said, you see tens and tens of engagements with Averroes, and it's not like it's just with my wife we're watching a very stupid American series now, Love is Blind, and there's a very good scene, last chapter, that there is the gay couple, lesbian couple, and they're sitting 4 people, doesn't matter. So one person speak about the acceptance. It's so important to accept gays and the lesbian sister gets really angry. She said, I don't need you to accept me. You know? When you accept me, it means like there's something wrong with me. I'm part. And it was so genius, so simple, and it's the same with Averroes. At some point he wasn't accepted anymore because acceptance means that I'm accepted. He became part of the live bloodstream of Jewish philosophy, and when this happened already at the 13th century, and in the 15th century when Del Medigo is writing, Averroes is everywhere.
And what happened with Del Medigo after his life? He had like an influence in Jewish philosophy, but also as Maimonides had an influence in rabbinical thought.
Rabbinical thought, nothing. Zero.
Yeah.
Zero. Jewish philosophy, I think maybe you came a few minutes after, that's what I said in the beginning. No, it's fine. I'm glad to say it again.
I was here, but
my memory
is not working.
Yeah, that's good. He wrote this one book very similar to Maimonides, how we can show the Judaism rational, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, not blah, blah, blah. And this book was very, you would like this, by the Haskalah, and especially by the Wissenschaft des Judentum. So by these Germans, in the 19th century, who created Jewish studies, they said, and we had Del Medigo who thought that, but they didn't care about the agent intellect and all these very technical Aristotelian terms. So these very philosophical treatises had zero impact. The little impact he had was very ideologically driven in Germany in the 19th century. And they used him, to fight Kabbalah. They said, this Kabbalah nonsense. You look at Del Medigo, he was rational, he was Maimonidean.
Hay un montón de cuestiones. ¿Alguna pregunta más? Claudia, ¿una pregunta?
No, gracias por la exposición. Iba un poco en el sentido de lo que preguntó bien. si todo el siglo XV está signado por la polémica entre platónicos y aristotélicos.
Sí.
¿Y por qué el Medigo elige como enemigo a los tomistas y no a los platónicos? Justamente
sí.
En el tema de del alma. Y me preguntaba si es porque Tomás ha sido un antiaverroísta.
Exactly. That's the answer.
Precisamente en el punto de la unidad del intelecto.
You asked the question and you answered it. Yes, it's because of that. He says just one time, he refers to the Florentine Platonic circles, and he says, it's just like Kabbalah. Let's not waste he says literally, let's not waste our time on things which doesn't make sense, or, and I think it was quite honest in that, from his perspective, of course.
Sí, perfecto, ¿no? Para ubicar ahí. ¿Alguna pregunta más? ¿Vos, Rubén, tenías algo para...?
If people want to go home also, I'm sorry, it's can also...
Pero yo articulo lo que preguntó Claudia con lo que había preguntado antes. Fernando, la cuestión normativa, alágica, que compromete estas posiciones averroístas. O sea, para un pensador judío y su relación con su propia comunidad, ¿dónde podía recibir propedéuticamente un texto que incitara a la ética, la moral, formas de comportamiento? Como que la posición averroísta diluye, suprime, anula toda posibilidad. Y vuelvo con este tema, ¿no? El tema de la individuación, porque en realidad se me ocurre ahora pensando, ¿no? Por ejemplo, Taylor considera que la idea de una sustancia formal distribuida en several individuos constituye una matriz de la modernidad. O sea, cuando hay una subjetividad, una conciencia, esa es la señal indubitable de que hay modernidad, la constitución de una interioridad, de una conciencia. Ese sería un way de la modernidad. Another way of modernity is precisely Averroes, como dos caminos de la secularización y la modernidad, o la subjetivación de la conciencia separada, ex nihilo, y como una entidad subsistente, o una, como decía Claudia, una elección por la unidad del intelecto material, que no es inculcado, que no es distribuido en cada individuo.
But I want to thank you for saying that, and sorry again if it's becoming a bit Averroistic specific, you get the Pomponazzi kind, but I all the time look at you, but because what you said now, I really want to try and defend Averroes through Del Medigo, because Del Medigo is answering exactly what you said now, and I will say it in one sentence. The fact that there is only one intellect doesn't mean that I don't have personal identity. And critics of Averroes since the Renaissance until today are often, they make it very easy. They said, Averroes believed that there is only one intellect and there is no personal identity. Averroes is actually not saying that, and Del Medigo is very, he's trying to say the presence of one intellect, that's the metaphysical reality. That's how things work. If you really want to understand how we think, there is only one. Given that I still have my identity, I still can achieve stuff, there is still sense of me trying to get stuff. And then Del Medigo is getting into a lot of trouble trying to make, and in my book I write, I'm not sure that he did it, that he succeeded. There are problems in this, but he's trying to do that. So it's not that the Averroists were these weird Satanists, or that when, there's no response, you respond, let's do whatever, anyway, there's only,
I come, I die, and then no, they within this framework they try to justify responsibility, not necessarily in a religious context, even just in a moral context, as you say.
Ahí hay un punto que vos me planteas en tu libro, es el tema de la materialidad, el materialismo, la materia.
Yeah.
Sí, la importancia de la corrupción y generación que viene unido a tomar la idea aristotélica de corrupción y generación como un compromiso ineludible con la materia. ¿Vos pensás que en el pensamiento judío hay, como hace poco leía a un autor, que uno puede encontrar una variable permanente que es un cierto grado de materialismo?
Good question. Maybe Spinoza.
Spinoza, después este autor que leí es un autor de Yale que se llama Stern, joven, que escribió un libro que se llama Materialismo Judío y que plantea que una línea...
It's a good question. I don't know. It's a very good question.
Que una línea puede ser llamada naturalista y lo que iría muy bien con el averroísmo, pero que hay una línea Uriel da Costa, Spinoza, la tradición epicoides dentro del judaísmo, una tradición oculta, como diría Hannah Arendt, de materialismo que recorre el pensamiento judío y que del medio podría...
I wouldn't put him there, but it's an...
Sí.
Justo yo estaba vibrando en esos temas que tú mencionabas, estabas compartiendo con Mijael. Pues estaba yo pensando, bueno, con Claudia también, ¿no? Que ¿por qué contra los tomistas y no contra los platónicos? Porque, digamos, si es que uno toma en cuenta Spinoza, ¿no? Con los filósofos favoritos que había mencionado antes, ustedes conocen, Epicuro, Demócrito y Lucrecio, hay una línea materialista. Porque Epicuro consideraba por sobre Demócrito que los átomos indivisibles no caían en movimiento vertical como pensaba Demócrito, sino que podían tener movimientos libres, lo que introducía el libre albedrío. Después del pensamiento, digamos, del intelecto compartido, uno llega a Spinoza, con natura natural, y paz nature, somos parte de ese intelecto. Entonces uno podría decir, ¿qué pasa? Porque Epicuro, cuando escribía sus cosas, no recuerdo los títulos, él tenía una epistemología bastante presente en estos días, digamos, que él consideraba la existencia de categorías a partir de la propia experiencia de los sentidos. Y a partir de esas categorías, uno ya podía hacer observaciones sistemáticas o investigación, ¿no? Lo que haría que esa categoría que se llamaba prelapsis, uno no puede construir razonamientos si es que no cuenta con esas. En ese sentido, uno diría que defiende un poquito a Platón. Por eso no le pega, porque necesita seguir la tradición de Epicuro, Lucrecio o Demócrito. O sea, él sería un materialista. Después lleva lo que tú mencionaste. Spinoza parece haber leído muy bien a Elia de Medio.
Por ahí, si alguien quiere desarrollar lo que se dijo recién, pero quizás estoy pensando en Greenblatt, en lo de Epicuro, y es cierto que quizás le voy a dar un giro, la indiferencia, ¿no? Leo Strauss, cuando discute con Gutmann sobre la historia de la filosofía judía, Leo Strauss tiene una discusión muy fuerte con otro gran historiador o reconstructor de la filosofía judía que fue Gutmann, y hace hincapié sobre una noción cristiana muy importante que es el providencialismo. El providencialismo es la idea de que Dios no es indiferente a nuestra vida, que hay un hado, eso es una supervivencia platónica, que efectivamente a Dios le importa nuestras acciones. Y hay toda una tradición perenne, remota y perenne, que es la epicuro de la indiferencia de los dioses. Ahora, para Leo Strauss, la idea de providencialismo, que por supuesto tiene antecedentes griegos, etcétera, etcétera, es una tradición triunfante en el cristianismo. O sea, la adquisición de que sonríe Dios te ama, de que nuestras acciones pueden gratificar a Dios, es una idea desconocida para el judaísmo, porque, como bien dice Spinoza, a Dios no le importa si lo queremos o no lo queremos, ¿no? Esa es famosa cuestión de Spinoza, ¿no? Entonces, me parece que sí, que hay una idea en el averroísmo de una indiferencia por el destino humano individual aparte, ¿no? Y eso se une con la salvación. Esa idea no providencialista, Dios no cuida de nosotros, no atiende de nosotros, y hay un lastre, una rémora epicura de los dioses indiferentes, que es la idea más angustiante que hay. Y si el cristianismo triunfó, fue porque por primera vez mi vida le importa a alguien. Por eso en las cárceles todos los grandes asesinos se hacen evangelistas, descubren eso.
Tal vez ahí podría uno, estamos contribuyendo de asociación libre, ¿no? Estaba pensando que ahí sería un conflicto en el nivel de lo sagrado.
Vos sos muy guenoniano.
No lo sabía.
No
lo he leído. Perdóname. Yo soy bastante de haber leído a Scholem.
Sí. Lo que pasa es que la idea de lo sagrado en el judaísmo es complicada porque es kadosh, es lo santo. Perdón. La palabra sagrado de Otto, de Rudolf Otto, y toda la tradición de lo sagrado, lo luminoso, es un poco ajena al judaísmo. Es una importación heideggeriana, de Mircea Eliade. No te lo digo mal, pero digo, la tradición de lo sagrado incluso puede ser conflictiva en la propia tradición católica, pero te lo digo con la mejor de las ondas. O sea, ahí hay un tema con los... No te digo por insistir mucho en lo sagrado. Yo, por ejemplo, detesto a Tarkovsky. Pero bueno, es un tema el de los sagrados.
Lo que pasa, antes que todo, como decía Aristóteles, parece, uno tiene que aclarar bien los conceptos que va a proponer al conversar sobre ello.
Sí.
¿No? Entonces, yo podré leer las respuestas, naturalmente. Pero yo al comienzo de mis contribuciones legas y entusiastas, propuse una definición de cómo yo entendía los planos, lo divino, lo sagrado y lo religioso. Lo divino es lo que uno no puede hacer, creación de vida, o resurrecciones. Lo sagrado es lo que no comparte el espacio con lo profano. Y lo religioso son prácticas o ritos de comunidades. Ahora, viendo lo sagrado, definido así como que uno no puede hablar de lotería en la sinagoga, no puede hablar de carreras de caballos en la iglesia católica, en el templo.
Sí, el filósofo y la ciudad. El problema entre el filósofo y la ciudad va a ser eterno y bueno, a menos que uno considere que lo religioso es... Pero por favor. No, vos.
No. It became too Spanish for me to follow, but I enjoyed the...
Yo me parece que olvidé la pregunta que iba a hacer cuando...
Perdón.
No olvidé saber que no era tan importante.
No, por favor, no. Estamos tratando de... Pero es retadora tu pregunta. No, yo creo que... No sé, sería por ahí bueno volver a Berroes. Fernando, también para complementar lo que dijo Alberto, ¿no?
¿Qué tengo que decir?
No, seguí.
El Luis está bueno. Se lo recomiendo. El tema que vos estabas trayendo de lo del fatum, ¿no? hecho hay toda una discusión en torno a la idea esta de la noción de no ser,
Habla más alto.
la noción de no ser del Maser en Ibn Ezra, en Maimónides, ¿no? Y de hecho después se termina también impactando en el capítulo 3 del Tratado Teológico Político de Spinoza, cuando this idea of that there is no chosen people because God really doesn't care about anybody, and there is the discussion around the idea of muscle in the Talmud, where this phrase "ein muscle" is the idea of what Pablo was saying. The personal fathom or the fate.
I got distracted for a second because did someone forget it? Sorry. That's why you ran. Sorry. Hold on. I thought that's why you ran out because of the leg, and then you forgot the leg. Sorry. If you would like to.
I don't know why Paulo started talking about the idea of fate, personal fate.
Yeah.
What's the position of the Medigo on that? Because I know that there is a kind of continuity between Ibn Ezra reading the Talmud and maybe not making any decision of if there is a pattern of fate for Israel, if there is really a group of people that we can
The chosen one.
the chosen ones or not. This is not really clear in Ibn Ezra, and this link between the stars and the astrology and the destiny, because somehow talking about the perspectives that you were quoting from a philosophical materialistic point of view, there is no destiny somehow. Or yes, but it's not personal, it's just a determination, kind of a stimulus, or I don't know, they bring so much fun story.
Pero no es tanto hay materialismo determinista y materialismo con albedrío. Pongamos, ya me acuerdo la pregunta que tenía hace ratito.
I help you.
Estaba pensando lo que mencionaste acerca de Averroes y el descreimiento en cuanto a que Dios, esto es lo que Dios no piensa en usted, que choca bastante en el plano, como yo me permití definir, de lo sagrado, es decir, lo que se habla en este ámbito, con la misma tradición de los Gamed Bab Sadikim, que es hermosísima, o los Gamed Bab Mistarim, Sadikim Mistarim. Los 36 personas justas. Para mí es
Somos nosotros.
Para mí es tan hermosa esa tradición porque, en principio, ninguna persona de los Sadikim va a decir yo lo soy, porque no lo sabe. Y si es que percibiese que lo es, no lo diría.
Borges.
Porque dejaría de ser Mistarim, o sea, humilde. Entonces, ahí viene una forma de comportarse virtuosa. Spinoza lo toma tan lindo en la última parte de la ética, la virtud y el mérito, y en donde uno se comporta virtuosamente porque eventualmente uno es parte de los Sadikim. Uno no lo sabe, pero si es que lo fuese, tiene que contribuir a mejorar a Dios, porque uno forma parte del fe. Es distinto de comportarse bien para evitar castigo o recibir premio. es la propia presencia de Jesús, mientras que uno es parte que es el mundo. Como hay una distinción entre un Spinoza y un Averroes. ¿De qué categorías uno incorpora como sagradas y qué categorías deja uno fuera? La construcción colectiva de hacer formar parte de la divinidad a la Spinoza, o una partecita que es indiferente de una cosa que se comparte, pero trascendente. Spinoza de una manera. Eso que ahí hay una.
Bien, Alberto, podemos cerrar acá. No mal, para cerrar. Aquí.
Una
Nuestra
última
componente.
cosa. Vos estás editando el tratado sobre comentarios de ánimo, el tratado sobre el de ánimo.
Sí.
¿Escribió algo sobre el destino? ¿Tiene algún...? Porque, por ejemplo, en los tratados de ánima se
El
respecto de la
comentario.
inmortalidad del alma o no. ¿Hay algún tratado del Medigo que sea sobre cuestiones éticas y sobre todo sobre el destino? Pregunto.
Good question. Not really.
No.
It's all very. He's Aristotelian genre. Let's say it's really physics and metaphysics.
Right.
So how things actually work from a Aristotelian physics and metaphysics. The second question that I didn't discuss at all is about the conjunction with the agent intellect and then what happens and in that way. So
Alexander of Aphrodiseus.
yeah, de facto, yeah.
Did not remember.
He's speaking about the agent as a final cause.
Right.
So he has discussions about the Aristotelian final cause. I would say that's the closest he comes to ethical discussions, but a separate, not that I know.
Right. Pomponazzi has this big treatise on
Pomponazzi
Paso. That's the one I'm working with.
Yeah, no. It's different caliber.
¿Les parece dos últimas preguntas?
No entiendo por qué a lo largo de la discusión se asimilaba la figura de Averroes con la del Medigo, cuando en realidad se parece, él reivindica o actualiza en su tiempo más una tradición aristotélica que Averroes.
I'm not sure I understood.
Why are we talking about Averroes?
Sí.
Or what about
More
more about
Aristotle.
Averroes than Aristotle?
Because Averroes offers a reading of Aristotle, which in the time of Averroes was very polemical. Before Averroes, there were, maybe you heard the names Al-Farabi and Avicenna, and they had a reading of Aristotle which was very influenced by Platonic or Neoplatonic aspects. A very almost banal example, but a very famous. According to Avicenna, God created the world, created it eternally, but God is the efficient cause of the world. Averroes says if you really read Aristotle, God is not the efficient cause of the world, it's only the final cause. And that's huge. And the question if you agree with Aristotle or with Avicenna or Averroes is a very big one. So that's why to speak just about Aristotle is almost naive in the medieval context, because what is there was no real Aristotle. There was the Al-Farabi, Aristotle, Avicenna, the Ibn Rushd. So that's why for us Averroes is the starting point. But it's a very good question.
Well, Pomponazzi tries to recover the real Aristotle because he
could read it
gets
also.
Yeah, he could. He didn't read.
No?
No.
No, but the Latin translations that were made that time from the Greek. And that's another because of that. Speaking about manuscript, the material cause, we have, 300 manuscripts of Averroes, 400. Someone wants to guess how many manuscripts of Aristotle we have in Hebrew that survived?
Kreiskas is a critic of Aristotle.
How many of only Aristotle? No Averroes, only Aristotle. Do you know how many? 4. Maybe 5, maybe 6, but something less than very, very little. Averroes became Aristotle. They became identified in the Jewish context, and that is also why Averroes is like the first layer.
¿Alguna pregunta más? Fascinante, la verdad que nos llevó a un lugar fascinante. ¿Alguna pregunta? Vos, Rubén, me habías comentado algo antes como para No, pero es interesante, ¿no? De la actualidad epistémica, del intelecto.
Una asociación.
Está bien, para terminar, puede ser una asociación.
Free, más prosaica. Cuando pensaba, le decía Pablo, de pronto uno tiene un celular, ¿no? O sea, una cosa material estrictamente, y se te muere el celular. Todos los WhatsApp, las fotos, los audios que uno tiene, van a una nube, ¿no es cierto? Ya se conservan de una manera inmaterial en un lugar, que estrictamente sabemos que son bits, o sea, es información. Es difícil no pensar respecto de ello, digamos, es una asimilación, ¿no? Digamos, que el cuerpo es eso, pero ¿no? Digamos, un celular que se muere, que caduca, que de pronto toda nuestra información va a un lugar donde se encuentra, donde sigue habiendo una individuación de la información, porque cada, digamos, tus fotos, tus audios se conservan, ¿no es cierto? Pero al mismo tiempo comparten en la nube la información de todo lo demás se puede recibir.
No, pero no están locos. Manuel Ecochea explotó mucho eso.
Lleva el CPU que quiere.
Pero el CPU se tarda.
Bueno.
Buenísimo. Muy bien.